Since the Stone Age, we've been increasingly addicted to energy. We use it directly to heat and light our homes, drive our cars and cook our meals. Our clothes, food and all of our possessions consumed energy when they were manufactured, packaged and transported to us, and this energy is produced at a price. We burn finite supplies of fossil fuels when there is an alternative. We emit huge volumes of carbon dioxide, methane and other greenhouse gases which lead directly to climate change on our planet. At our current rate of consumption, we would need 3 planets to sustain us. We have 1. We're steadily reducing the chance of a sustainable future for our children and our grandchildren, and yet the technology is available to move away from this ever more treacherous path. This video will focus on using solar energy to produce electricity and hot water by using solar photovoltaic technology and solar water heaters in our buildings. Technology has moved on a huge amount in recent years, alongside legislation and financial incentives for generating renewable energy. Many technologies now pay back the initial financial investment within 5 years and pay back the energy used in their manufacture within 2 or 3. With a lifespan often of 30 years and an eternity of sunshine, we really are at the stage where these technologies are a viable option. This video is about solutions, but they're only solutions if they are used. If you, I, everyone we know and everyone they know does their bit. I hope you're watching this video because you want to be part of the movement away from our current unsustainable methods of energy production and towards a brighter future. It's not all about conscience though. I'm also going to give you cold hard engineering facts and thorough financial calculations. So why are we even discussing this in the first place? There's several independent reasons, each on their own enough to convince us, but put together they're utterly irrefutable. In 2007, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reported that warming of the climate system cannot be denied, and that there's a very strong likelihood that this is a result of human activity. These are very strong words from an international group of climate scientists, and we must heed their message. Over the past 150 years, global average temperatures have risen by 0.8 degrees Celsius. Sea levels have risen, and northern hemisphere snow cover has reduced. Global greenhouse gas emissions from human activities have almost doubled since the Industrial Revolution. The implementation of energy-saving measures and movement away from our reliance on fossil fuels could restrain global temperature rises, avoiding the worst effects of climate change, compared with a potential rise of up to 6 degrees if no action is taken. Although carbon dioxide is not the most damaging greenhouse gas in terms of global warming potential per kilogram, it's important to focus on because of the huge quantities that we emit. In 2007, carbon dioxide made up 85% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions. For this reason, and for simplicity, we focus on emissions of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalents when comparing technologies. And just how urgent is this? So far, we've pushed up global temperatures by about 0.8 degrees Celsius, but because of the 40 or 50-year time lag between emissions and temperature rise, the emissions already in the atmosphere commit us to an additional 0.6 degrees of warming over coming decades. We're now dangerously close to the tipping point in the world's climate system, the point of no return, after which truly catastrophic changes become inevitable. Unless we reverse emissions by the middle of the coming decade, 2015, then the likelihood is that we'll forever have committed the world to 2 degrees C of global warming. That means that we'll trigger the irreversible melting of the Greenland, Antarctic and Arctic ice caps, that will trigger the melting of the Alaskan and Siberian permafrost, will trigger the death of the world's rainforest belt, and we will acidify the world's oceans. The point of it all is that if we hit that 2 degrees C of global warming, then all of these ecosystem collapses will release vast amounts of further greenhouse gases, triggering positive feedback and runaway climate change. The first human impacts will come in the form of steeply declining access to fresh water, as rainfall patterns change, glacier-fed rivers dry up, and rising sea levels contaminate fresh water supplies. As crops fail, deserts spread, forests burn, and coastal regions flood permanently, people will start to pack up their things in their billions and move on in search of a better life elsewhere. But where? What will humanity mean in a world where countries which remain mostly habitable, like Britain, use the most of our remaining resources fighting to keep out the starving millions who can no longer live in their own countries as a result of our lifestyles? Okay, here's the good news. None of this is inevitable yet. It's not the time to panic or to despair. It's time to act while we still can. So is that a good enough reason to seriously invest in low carbon technologies? Personally, I would say yes, but there is another reason. Oil is a finite resource. Even if we move away from the impacts of extracting and burning it, we cannot escape this fact. Peak oil is the moment when we reach our maximum rate of petroleum production and move into decline. Many experts predict that peak oil will soon be reached. Estimates vary, but some predictions state that oil production will decline within the next 5 years. The USA has imported oil since 1970 after it became uneconomical to extract from its own reserves. Our move from our dependence on finite fossil fuels is also essential to ensure that when peak oil does happen, it doesn't lead to problems with energy security, not to mention in the global economy. In Europe, our resource use has constantly increased over the past 30 years, and our dependence on external energy resources is increasing. Globally, the rate of discovery of new oil reserves is reducing, and the new supplies that we do find are involving more and more expensive methods of extraction. The time of easy access to plentiful supplies of fossil fuels at low prices is over. The UK has been bound by international legislation since ratifying the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1993. This committed us to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 12.5% by 2012, based on 1990 levels, and to publish national emission inventories of greenhouse gases on a regular basis. More recently, the Climate Change Act came into force, which committed us to a domestic goal of reducing emissions by 80% by 2050. The Stern Review in 2006 reported the scientific consensus that climate change was a serious global threat, and that while the cost of action to avoid the worst effects will be 1% of gross domestic product, the cost of inaction would be between 5 and 20%. In 2009, the European Union agreed its Renewable Energy Directive. This sets the UK a target requiring that 15% of energy consumption should come from renewable sources by 2020, and will receive heavy financial penalties if we do not meet this target. The Scottish Executive have also introduced a target that renewable sources would provide for 50% of gross electricity consumption in Scotland by 2020, with an interim target of 31% by 2011. So how does that help us as individuals or companies to invest in these technologies? There is a growing range of financial incentives. From the 1st of April 2010, every unit of electricity generated from home by a photovoltaic system under 5 megawatt hours earned up to 41.3 pence per unit through the new feed-in tariff. There are also plans to introduce a similar scheme for renewable heat generation from April 2011. For electricity from renewable sources, householders will be paid a generation rate by the energy supplier for each kilowatt hour produced. This rate would be set for 25 years for solar photovoltaic systems to allow for long-term budgeting. To encourage reduced use of energy and to diversify our grid supply, on top of this, an additional 3 pence per kilowatt hour will be paid for each generated unit that is unused and hence is fed into the grid. Obviously, the additional benefit is that savings will also be made on energy bills. This could mean around £830 per year for a typical sized solar electricity installation, dramatically reducing the payback period of any capital costs. This makes solar energy a very attractive option and raises the value of properties which are built with this nice little earner already installed. Another available incentive is the microgeneration grant. The Department for Business, Innovation and Skills provides grants to public sector buildings and charities for the installation of microgeneration technologies throughout the UK. The Building Research Establishment coordinates the award of grants as part of the Low Carbon Buildings programme. Up to £1 million can be claimed per site for a maximum of 3 different technologies. The same organisation can make several applications for different sites, and up to 50% of the cost of installing solar photovoltaics and up to 30% of the cost of solar thermal systems can be funded. Renewables Obligation Certificates, or ROCs, are another way of earning money from renewable energy generation. Utility companies must currently produce 9.1% of their energy from renewable sources, rising to 15.4% by 2016. A microgenerator can currently claim different amounts of ROCs per megawatt hour, depending on the technology being installed. Currently, 2 ROCs can be claimed for 1 megawatt hour from solar. Utility companies currently pay microgenerators £33 per ROC. However, this amount varies in response to market conditions. The Climate Change Levy is an environmental tax levied on the supply of electricity and gas, among others. To encourage the growth of low-carbon technologies, electricity generated from renewable sources is exempt from climate change levy. Ofgem issues a levy exemption certificate, currently worth £4.41, for each megawatt hour that an accredited renewable generator produces. So all in all, we find ourselves in a position where we're faced with a challenge that we've created ourselves. To move away from our reliance on a finite resource, to reduce our emissions and the results of our emissions, and to keep in line with international and national legislation, we have to act. It makes financial, moral and just plain common sense.